Keanu Reeves walked silently through the lobby of the military hospital, the faint hum of activity around him barely breaking through his thoughts. He had come here for a reason, but what he didn't expect was the heaviness in the air. The hospital, a place of healing, was a stark reminder of the toll that service to the country had taken on so many. He had always admired the courage of those who fought, but nothing could prepare him for the faces that greeted him here. Faces that spoke of endless sacrifice, loss, and a quiet strength that only those who had walked through hell could understand. As he moved past the rows of nurses and doctors, a nurse with a solemn expression approached him. "Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice warm but cautious. "The patients here, they don't expect someone like you." Keanu stopped, looking at her with a quiet intensity. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice soft, but with a hint of confusion. The nurse hesitated before answering, her eyes scanning the hall as if to make sure no one could overhear. "They've been through so much," she continued. "These soldiers, they've seen things, done things. Some of them are broken in ways that words can't describe, and to them you're just an actor, a name they've seen on a screen. They don't know if anyone cares about them. But you're here now. That means something." Keanu felt a lump form in his throat. He had come to do something simple, something small. He had come to visit. But now he felt the weight of what it truly meant. He wasn't just there as a celebrity. He wasn't just another name. To these men and women, his presence could be a lifeline. It could be a reminder that someone, anyone, still cared. "Take me to them," Keanu said, his voice low but firm. The nurse nodded, leading him down the corridor to a ward where the most critically injured soldiers were recovering. As they reached the door, she paused and turned to him. "I should warn you," she said quietly. "It's hard to see. These men, they've lost so much. Physically, mentally, emotionally. Some of them may not even recognize you." Keanu nodded, his resolve strengthening. He wasn't here for recognition. He wasn't here for applause. He was here to give a piece of his time, his humanity, to those who had given so much already. As the door opened, Keanu was greeted with the sight of several men lying in beds, their bodies scarred and broken. Some of them were awake, staring at the ceiling, their eyes empty as if lost in thoughts they couldn't escape. Others were asleep, their faces pale and gaunt. The silence in the room was heavy, the weight of trauma and grief pressing in on Keanu like a physical force. He stepped forward cautiously, his heart aching as he took in the scene. One soldier, a man in his early 30s with dark eyes that seemed to pierce through the gloom, was the first to notice him. At first, his expression was one of disbelief, as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. But then slowly he sat up, wincing from the pain, and his voice cracked when he spoke. "Keanu Reeves? Is that really you?" Keanu smiled softly, his eyes warm. "Yeah, it's me," he said, moving closer. "I'm here to visit." The soldier's face softened, a hint of a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "I never thought I'd see the day," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Keanu could see the man's eyes tear up, but he didn't look away. He didn't flinch. "Thank you," the soldier added, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for being here." Keanu reached out, placing a hand on the soldier's shoulder, a gesture of solidarity, of compassion. But the soldier, now fully awake, looked up at Keanu, his face filled with a mix of gratitude and pain. "You have no idea what it means," he said, his voice wavering. "No one comes here. No one comes for us." Keanu felt a lump form in his throat. He didn't know what to say. He had never expected a visit like this to hit him so hard. He had known. These soldiers were heroes, but standing here in the room, seeing them up close, it was different. The reality of their sacrifice hit him in a way he wasn't prepared for. "You've already given so much," Keanu said quietly, his voice cracking. "I'm just here to listen. Just here to let you know that you're not forgotten. You matter." The soldier wiped his eyes, trying to keep his composure. but Keanu could see the raw emotion bubbling beneath the surface. It wasn't just about the injuries. It wasn't just about the physical scars, it was about the emotional wounds that no one could see, the wounds that never truly healed. The soldier nodded slowly. We just want to be seen," he said, his voice breaking. "We want to know that we're not invisible, that someone out there remembers." Keanu's chest tightened as the weight of the soldier's words settled, and he had always tried to use his platform for good, to inspire people, to give back. But this was something deeper, something more real than anything he had ever experienced. "I see you," Keanu said, his voice firm with conviction. "You're not invisible. You're heroes, and I won't forget." The words hung in the air for a moment, thick with the weight of their meaning. Keanu stayed by the soldier's side, his hand still on the man's shoulder as the room fell silent. Other soldiers in the ward began to stir, their gazes shifting toward Keanu, some in disbelief, others with cautious curiosity. The air in the room shifted, a quiet reverence settling over the men who had long felt abandoned by the world. They weren't used to visitors, especially not someone like Keanu Reeves, a figure from a world so far removed from theirs. One by one, soldiers started to speak, their voices hesitant, but filled with raw emotion. A man in his 40s, his legs, bandaged and propped up, cleared his throat. "I never thought anyone would come," he said, his voice rough. "Not after everything. We fought for so long, but it feels like we've been forgotten." Keanu turned to him, meeting his eyes with a warmth that seemed to fill the room. "You haven't been forgotten," Keanu said, his voice steady. "Not by me, and not by anyone who truly understands what you've done." The soldier swallowed hard, his eyes glistening with tears. "I don't know why you're here, but I'm grateful," he said quietly, his gaze drifting toward the window, as though lost in memories. Maybe someone like you coming in here is a sign that we're still worth something." Keanu took a step closer, sensing the depth of the pain this man had carried with him. "You are worth everything," he said softly. "The world may not always show it, but I know your sacrifice. You've given more than most people could ever imagine." Another soldier, a young man with a scar across his cheek, spoke up. "I just wanted to go home," he said, his voice cracking. "I thought I'd make it through and get back to my family. But now, I don't even know what I'm supposed to feel." Keanu's heart clenched at the vulnerability in the man's voice. He could see the confusion, the uncertainty in his eyes. These soldiers, despite their toughness and resilience, were still human. They still struggled with feelings of isolation and doubt, just like anyone else. "It's okay to feel lost," Keanu said gently. "But what you're going through doesn't define you. Your strength is in how you keep moving forward, even when it feels impossible." The room grew quieter as the soldiers listened, hanging on to Keanu's words like lifelines thrown in a storm. Keanu knew he couldn't erase their pain, but he hoped he could help them see that their struggles weren't invisible, that they didn't have to carry the burden alone. Just then, the nurse from earlier walked back into the room, her eyes filled with a quiet admiration as she watched Keanu interact with the soldiers. She had seen him in countless movies, admired his work from afar, but watching him here, standing in this hospital, connecting with these men in such an intimate way, was something she hadn't expected. "Mr. Reeves," she said softly, interrupting the quiet moment. We weren't sure how they'd react to someone like you. But I think you've made a difference." Keanu smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. "I didn't come here to be a hero, I just wanted to listen." The nurse gave him a knowing look. "Sometimes just being there is enough. These men, they need to know someone cares. And I think you've done that." Keanu nodded, but something in his chest tightened as he looked around the room. There were so many stories here, so many lives torn apart by the cost of war. He realized then that the act of listening, the act of showing up, was far more powerful than he had ever imagined. One of the soldiers, a man who had been sitting quietly by the window, suddenly spoke. You know, he said, his voice steady, but his eyes distant. When I left the battlefield, I thought I was coming home. But I didn't realize that what I was coming back to was a whole different war, one I couldn't see, but I could feel every day. Keanu turned to him, sensing the weight of those words. It's a war you don't have to fight alone, Keanu said, his voice strong and clear. You've got a lot of people who care, and they're waiting for you to come back, to heal. You're not forgotten. You're never alone. The soldier met Keanu's gaze, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. For a brief moment, the harshness of his situation seemed to soften. He gave Keanu a faint nod, as if he were finally starting to believe what Keanu had said. And in that quiet room, surrounded by the men who had fought and sacrificed for their country, Keanu realized that he wasn't just a visitor anymore. He wasn't just an actor or a celebrity. He was someone who had shown up, someone who had given his time and his heart to people who needed it the most. In that moment, he felt a deep connection to these men, a bond that transcended words and fame. It was a bond built on shared humanity, on the understanding that no matter where they came from or what they had been through, they were all part of the same world. Keanu gave them a final, lingering look before turning to leave. Take care of each other, he said, his voice soft but filled with the weight of his sincerity. And never forget that you matter, to me and to the world. As he walked out of the room, the nurses, the soldiers, and even Keanu himself felt something shift in the air. A sense of peace, however fleeting, had descended on the ward, and for the first time in a long time, these men felt like they weren't invisible anymore. Keanu stepped out of the ward, his heart heavy but filled with a sense of purpose he hadn't expected. The sound of footsteps echoed in the corridor as he walked, but it wasn't just the noise that lingered. It was the silence that followed him, the quiet realization that he had made a small difference in the lives of those who needed it most. As he made his way to the hospital's main entrance, he found himself reflecting on the faces he had seen, the men who had fought for something greater than themselves, yet had returned home to a world that felt just as distant and foreign as the battlefields they had left behind. He thought about the soldier who had spoken about the war that raged inside him, a war that no one could see. Keanu had heard about PTSD, but hearing it from someone who had lived through it hit differently. It made the reality of their struggles so much more personal. The nurse who had guided him through the hospital came to stand beside him as they reached the front doors. She had been quietly watching him, as if waiting for him to speak. But Keanu didn't have the words right away. He just stood there, his gaze fixed on the horizon as the evening sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a warm glow over the city. It was hard to grasp the enormity of what he had just experienced. You did more than you know, the nurse said, softly, her voice full of respect. Keanu turned to her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and uncertainty. I don't know if I did enough, he admitted. I came here thinking I could just visit and make their day a little brighter. But I left realizing that there's so much more I could be doing. The nurse gave him a gentle smile, her eyes understanding. Sometimes just being present is all they need. They don't expect miracles. They don't expect anyone to fix them. But when someone like you shows up and tells them they matter, that makes all the difference. Keanu nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. He hadn't expected to learn so much from this visit. He hadn't expected to be reminded of the true cost of war, not just the physical wounds, but the scars that stayed hidden beneath the surface. As he turned to leave, Keanu spotted another soldier sitting outside on a bench, his back turned to the hospital. He appeared to be lost in thought, his posture slumped as though carrying a weight far heavier than his body. Keanu paused, an instinct pulling him toward the man. Without saying a word, he walked over to him, gently taking a seat beside him. The soldier didn't look up at first, but after a long moment, he spoke. You don't have to sit here with me, he said quietly. I'm not some kind of hero. I don't need your sympathy. Keanu looked at him, his voice calm but filled with sincerity. I'm not here to pity you, he said gently. I'm here to listen. If you want to talk, I'm here. The soldier sighed, his shoulders slumping further. I don't know what to say, he muttered. I came back from the war, but I don't know who I am anymore. I thought I'd be strong enough to deal with all this, but I'm not. Keanu's heart tightened as he listened to the soldier's words. He could hear the shame in his voice, the shame of not being able to live up to the expectations of others and even his own expectations of himself. Keanu knew that feeling all too well. It's okay to not be okay, he said quietly, his voice steady and reassuring. You don't have to have all the answers right now. You're not broken because you're struggling, you're human. The soldier turned to him then, his eyes searching Keanu's face for any hint of judgment. There was none. Just understanding. I don't know how to move forward, the soldier confessed, his voice shaky. I just feel stuck. Keanu nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving the man. You don't have to move forward alone, he said softly. You've got people who care. And the first step to healing is accepting that you need help. You're not weak for feeling lost, it takes a lot of strength to admit it. For the first time, the soldier's gaze softened, and the flicker of hope sparked in his eyes. He didn't speak immediately, but Keanu could tell that the words had landed. It wasn't a magical fix, but it was a start. The soldier wasn't alone anymore. Thank you, the soldier said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. I needed to hear that. Keanu smiled, his heart swelling with a quiet pride. You don't have to thank me. Just take it one day at a time, and remember you're stronger than you think. As Keanu stood up to leave, he glanced back at the soldier, who was now sitting a little straighter, his posture less slumped than before. It wasn't much, but it was progress, and sometimes that's all it takes, a small shift in perspective, a little hope where there was none before. Keanu walked back to the entrance, his footsteps lighter than before. The nurse gave him a small nod as he approached. They'll remember this, she said softly. You've given them more than you realize. Keanu stopped for a moment, looking back at the hospital that had opened his eyes to a world he hadn't truly understood. He had come to visit, but what he left with was something far greater, an understanding of the real heroes, the ones who fought battles that no one else could see. And as he walked out into the world beyond those hospital walls, he knew that his mission wasn't over. It had just begun. The cool night air brushed against Keanu's face as he stepped outside the hospital. The weight of the visit lingered, not just in his thoughts, but in his chest. He had given those soldiers something they didn't expect. His time, his attention, and his respect. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to be done. As he walked to his car, his mind replayed the conversations, the faces, and the pain he had witnessed. He thought about the soldier who had talked about feeling stuck, and how his eyes had finally shown a glimmer of hope after Keanu's words. That small shift was a reminder of the power of simple kindness and empathy. It wasn't about fixing their lives. It was about acknowledging their struggles, showing up for them, and letting them know they weren't invisible. Keanu was deep in thought when his phone buzzed in his pocket, interrupting his reflections. He pulled it out and saw a text from his assistant. Keanu, there's a charity event tomorrow. They've asked if you'd be willing to speak. Keanu paused for a moment, his mind flickering back to the soldiers. The idea of attending another event, of being in the spotlight again, didn't seem as important as what he had just experienced. But then something inside him stirred, a sense of responsibility. He had a platform. He had the ability to raise awareness, to make a difference in ways far beyond just visiting hospitals or attending events. He replied to the text, "Yes, I'll be there." The next day, Keanu stood at the front of a large ballroom, the elegant surroundings feeling almost surreal compared to the stark, quiet hospital he had visited just hours earlier. The event was filled with influential people, celebrities, philanthropists, politicians, all gathered to raise money for veterans and active service members. Keanu wasn't sure what to expect from such a crowd. It felt like a world apart from the one he had just left. The speeches were polished, rehearsed, But when it was his turn to speak, something inside him clicked. He walked up to the microphone, his usual calm demeanor masking the storm of thoughts swirling inside him. He knew what he had to say. "I've been to a lot of events like this," he began, his voice steady though carrying a quiet intensity. "I've met a lot of people with big hearts, and I've seen what you're all doing to support our soldiers and veterans. But yesterday I visited a military hospital. I met men who have sacrificed everything. They didn't ask for recognition. They didn't ask for sympathy. They just want to be seen." He paused, scanning the room. "We talk a lot about giving back, but how often do we actually show up for the people who need us the most?" The room fell silent, everyone hanging on his words. Keanu's voice softened, but his message was clear. "It's not enough to donate money or attend events. We need to be present. We need to listen. The real heroes don't wear capes or stand in front of cameras. They wear uniforms and carry invisible scars. And they need our support, not just in a photo op, but in everyday, real ways." The crowd remained still, some people shifting in their seats, others nodding quietly. It was clear that Keanu wasn't speaking just to raise funds. He was speaking to change something deeper, to shift the focus from grand gestures to genuine, heartfelt action. As he finished his speech, the applause was soft at first, but then grew louder, more sincere. Keanu didn't feel proud. He felt humbled. He wasn't a hero. He wasn't the one who deserved praise. It was the men and women he had met the day before who truly deserved that recognition. He was just a messenger, a voice for the ones who were too often forgotten. After the event, a few people approached him to express their admiration for his words. One man, an older veteran with a weathered face, shook his hand firmly. "Thank you for speaking out," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You're right. We don't need the fancy speeches or the attention. We just need to be remembered, to know that we matter." Keanu gave him a small nod, his eyes sincere. "You matter more than you know," he said quietly. The day had been a blur, talks, photos, brief meetings. But Keanu couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted inside him. The visit to the hospital had opened his eyes to a world he had only brushed against before. He wasn't just an actor. He wasn't just a face on a screen. He had a voice, and he had the power to use it. And that meant more than any movie role ever could. As Keanu returned to his car, his assistant waiting for him by the door, he felt a quiet resolve settle over him. He wasn't sure where this journey would take him, but he knew one thing for sure: he wouldn't turn away from it. The soldiers had reminded him that the most important thing in life wasn't fame or success. It was the people you helped, the lives you touched, and the way you made others feel seen. And Keanu wasn't about to forget that. He was just getting started. The days that followed were a blur for Keanu, filled with phone calls, meetings, and media appearances. But amidst all the noise, the impact of his hospital visit and the speech he had given at the charity event remained with him. It wasn't just the recognition he had received that felt important. It was the quiet conversations, the genuine connections, and the understanding that had slowly unfolded within him. Keanu had always known that fame came with its challenges, but now he saw it differently. He realized that his platform could do more than just entertain. It could inspire real change. His thoughts were interrupted when he received an invitation to visit a local veterans center. It wasn't an event this time, but a small, private gathering. The center had reached out to thank him for his efforts and to invite him to meet a few veterans who were struggling, hoping his visit might offer them a moment of hope. Keanu agreed without hesitation. He had learned that these small, intimate moments often held more significance than grand gestures. When he arrived at the Veterans Center, it was a far cry from the polished charity event he had attended. The room was modest, the walls adorned with old photos and war memorabilia. It felt like stepping into another world, a world far from the Hollywood glitz he was used to. He was greeted by a group of veterans, some young, some old, but all carrying a quiet, shared pain. As Keanu took a seat with them, he noticed how they avoided eye contact at first, as if unsure of how to approach someone they saw on TV. But Keanu wasn't there to be a celebrity. He was there to listen. One by one, the veterans began to share their stories, each more raw and heartbreaking than the last. A young man who had lost his leg in a combat mission, a woman who had served multiple tours and struggled with the trauma of what she had seen, an older man who had never fully recovered from the mental scars of war. Keanu's heart ached as he listened. These weren't just soldiers, they were real people, carrying burdens that no one could truly understand unless they had lived through it. The young man with the prosthetic leg spoke first. "I've been home for a year now, but every day feels like a battle," he said, his voice shaky. "People look at me like I'm a hero, but they don't know what it's like when the applause stops. They don't see the quiet moments when I wonder if I'm even enough to be called a man anymore." Keanu leaned forward, his voice soft but full of empathy. "You are enough," he said firmly. "You are more than enough. You don't have to wear a cape or be anything other than who you are. You've already shown a strength that most people can't even comprehend." The young man looked up, surprised by Keanu's words. There was a moment of silence before he nodded slowly, as if the weight of the statement was beginning to settle in. Then, the woman spoke, her voice low but filled with emotion. "I can't forget the faces of the people I lost over there. It haunts me every night," she said, her eyes glistening with tears. "I came back, but I don't feel like I'm really here. It's like I'm stuck in the past, trapped in a world where I don't belong anymore." Keanu reached out, his hand resting on hers. "I can't pretend to know what you've been through," he said, his voice steady and full of compassion. "But you're not alone. You don't have to carry that pain by yourself. It's okay to lean on others to ask for help. And it's okay to heal at your own pace." The woman looked at him, and for the first time in a long while, there was a flicker of hope in her eyes. She nodded slowly, as if accepting the possibility that healing wasn't just a far-off dream. The older man, who had been silent for most of the conversation, finally spoke. "I've been carrying this for decades," he said, his voice rough with age and regret. "I lost so many friends, so many comrades. I don't know how to make sense of it anymore. I thought I could bury it, but it keeps coming back. Every day it's there." Keanu sat quietly for a moment, letting the words sink in. Then he spoke, his voice low but powerful. "You don't have to bury it," he said. "The memories of those you lost are a part of who you are, and they always will be. But they don't have to define you. You can honor their memory by living the life they would have wanted for you. A life full of love, connection, and the courage to move forward." The room was quiet after Keanu's words, and for the first time, the veterans seemed to be breathing a little easier. They were still carrying the weight of their pasts, but perhaps, just perhaps, they no longer had to carry it alone. As the visit came to an end, Keanu stood up and shook each of their hands, offering a simple but heartfelt thank you for their service, for their bravery, and for allowing him to share in their journey, even if just for a moment. As he walked out of the Veterans Center, Keanu felt a renewed sense of purpose. He had started this journey not knowing exactly where it would take him, but now he understood. It wasn't about grand gestures or making headlines. It was about showing up, being present, and giving people the space to heal. And that, Keanu realized, was the greatest gift he could offer. The next few days were quieter for Keanu, but the weight of his visit to the Veterans Center stayed with him. It had been a small, intimate moment, just a handful of veterans sharing their experiences with him. But it had shifted something deep inside him. He couldn't stop thinking about how powerful it had been to simply be there for them, to listen without judgment, and to offer words of encouragement that perhaps they hadn't heard in a long time. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this was something he could continue to do, not just for veterans, but for anyone who needed a voice, someone who could listen and offer support. Keanu's life had always been public: movies, interviews, red carpets, but it was the quiet moments, the real, raw connections that had started to matter the most. One evening, as he sat at home, Keanu received a call that would change the course of his journey. It was a charity he had been working with for several months, focusing on mental health support for first responders. They had received an urgent request. A firefighter who had witnessed multiple traumatic events over his career was at his breaking point. He was struggling with PTSD, and he had reached out for help. But instead of finding the support he needed, he was being pushed aside by those who didn't fully understand the depth of his pain. The charity wanted Keanu to meet him, to speak with him, and to offer some guidance. Keanu knew this wasn't an easy request. It was one thing to speak at an event or write a check. It was another thing entirely to sit face to face with someone who was at their lowest, someone who felt invisible and unheard. But Keanu also knew he couldn't turn away. "I'll meet him," Keanu said, his voice firm with resolve. The next day, he found himself walking into a firehouse on the outskirts of town, the air thick with the scent of burning wood and the smell of soot that seemed to cling to everything. The firefighter was waiting for him, sitting at a table, his hands folded in front of him. His face was hard, a mask of determination, but Keanu could see the cracks in his facade. He could see the weariness in his eyes. They sat down together, the silence hanging between them for a moment. The firefighter didn't speak at first, his eyes fixed on the floor as if the words he needed to say were stuck somewhere deep inside him. Keanu waited patiently, giving him space. Finally, the firefighter spoke, his voice rough and raw. "I've seen things," he said, his words trembling slightly. "Things that no one should ever have to see. People I couldn't save. Fires I couldn't put out. And it's all still with me. Every single day. I don't know how to get rid of it. I don't know how to move on." Keanu listened closely, his heart heavy with empathy. "You don't have to forget," he said softly. "You don't have to erase the memories, they're part of who you are. But you can learn how to carry them differently. You can learn how to move forward without letting the weight of the past crush you." The firefighter looked up at him, his eyes searching Keanu's face for any hint of judgment. Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He just sat there, offering the kind of quiet understanding that could only come from someone who truly saw him. "It's not about being strong enough to ignore it," Keanu continued. "It's about being brave enough to face it, to admit that it hurts, and to ask for help when you need it." There was a long pause as the firefighter processed Keanu's words. Keanu knew that he wasn't offering some quick fix, some magical solution. Healing didn't happen in a day, but what he could offer was a reminder that asking for help wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a sign of strength. Finally, the firefighter spoke again, his voice softer now, more vulnerable. "I've been too proud. I thought I could handle it on my own. But it's been breaking me down, bit by bit. I didn't want anyone to know, to see me like this. But now," he trailed off, looking at Keanu with a mixture of shame and relief. Keanu nodded slowly. "You don't have to fight this alone. You don't have to pretend everything's okay when it's not. The people who care about you want to help, and that's what we're here for." They sat in silence for a while, Keanu letting the words hang in the air, giving the firefighter the time he needed to process. It wasn't easy. It would never be easy. But sometimes just knowing that someone was willing to listen, really listen, was the first step toward healing. As they talked more, Keanu could see the tension in the firefighter's posture slowly begin to fade. It wasn't a transformation, but it was a shift. A small crack in the armor that had been built over years of silent suffering. By the time the meeting came to an end, there was a quiet understanding between them. Keanu stood up, offering his hand to the firefighter. "I'm proud of you," he said. "You've taken the first step, and that's the hardest one." The firefighter shook his hand, his grip firm but still uncertain. "Thank you," he said quietly, his voice filled with a gratitude that Keanu could feel. I think I can try." As Keanu left the firehouse, he felt something settle in his chest. The journey he had started with those veterans wasn't just about one visit, one speech, or one person. It was about showing up for people, about letting them know they were seen, heard, and valued. That was the most important thing he could offer. And as he drove away, he made a silent vow to himself that no matter where life took him, he would continue to be that presence for others. The journey wasn't over yet. It had only just begun. The days that followed were a whirlwind of reflection and realization for Keanu. His experience with the firefighter had left a lasting impact on him. It wasn't just that he had helped someone find the courage to face their struggles. It was the sense of purpose that had begun to fill him in ways that fame and success never could. As he continued his journey, he found himself thinking more and more about the power of listening, the profound impact it could have on someone's life, the quiet act of simply being present for another person, letting them know they weren't alone in their struggles, seemed to be more powerful than anything he could have imagined. Keanu began to realize that this wasn't just about doing charity, work, or making public appearances. It was about using his platform to truly make a difference in the lives of those who needed it most. It wasn't about seeking accolades or praise. It was about offering something real, something that went beyond the superficial. As Keanu sat in his quiet home one evening, reflecting on all that had happened, he received another unexpected call. This time, it was from a hospital. A young woman, a survivor of a tragic car accident, had been in a coma for months. She had finally awakened, but the road to recovery was long and uncertain. Her family had been by her side, but they had reached out to Keanu, hoping that his visit could offer some comfort, some hope in a time of uncertainty. Keanu didn't hesitate. He knew that his journey wasn't just about giving words of wisdom to those who were strong. It was about reaching out to those who felt broken, who were trying to piece their lives back together. When he arrived at the hospital, he was met with the somber atmosphere of a place where hope and fear coexisted in a delicate balance. The family was waiting in the waiting room, their faces drawn with exhaustion, but there was a glimmer of hope in their eyes when they saw him. They didn't expect miracles. They simply hoped that Keanu's presence could offer a bit of light in the darkness. Keanu walked into the room where the young woman lay, her body frail and still, her eyes closed as if in a deep, peaceful sleep. Her parents were standing by her side, their hands clasped tightly, waiting for any sign of movement. Keanu stood at the door for a moment, taking in the scene. It was quiet, save for the beeping of machines and the soft rustle of sheets. There was something almost sacred about the moment, something raw and vulnerable. He approached her bed slowly, quietly, unsure of what to say. Words seemed so small in comparison to what this family had been through, but he knew that sometimes the most meaningful thing you could offer was your presence. Keanu sat down beside the bed, gently taking the woman's hand in his. He didn't speak right away. He just sat there, holding her hand, offering a quiet kind of support. Her parents watched him, their eyes filled with gratitude. They weren't asking for anything big. They just wanted their daughter to know that she was loved, that she wasn't alone. After a long moment, Keanu spoke softly, almost as if he were speaking to the woman directly, though she couldn't hear him yet. "You're stronger than you know," he said quietly. "And you don't have to fight this alone. We're all here for you." There was a silence in the room after his words, and for a moment, it felt as if time itself had paused. Keanu didn't know if she could hear him, but he hoped she could. He hoped that somehow his words were reaching her, even in her unconscious state. He stayed there for a while, just sitting beside her, offering his presence as a reminder that there was still hope. After a few hours, Keanu quietly left the hospital, leaving behind a small piece of his heart with the young woman and her family. He didn't know what would happen next. He didn't know if his visit would have any immediate impact, but he knew that he had done what he could. He had shown up. He had listened. And for Keanu, that was enough. As he drove back home, Keanu found himself reflecting once again on the power of human connection. It wasn't just about offering advice or finding solutions. It was about being there for someone when they needed it most, when they couldn't find the strength to carry on alone. And sometimes that was all anyone needed. To know that someone cared, to know that they weren't invisible in the face of their struggles. It was in these moments, these quiet, unspoken moments, that Keanu found his true purpose. And as the days passed, he realized that this journey wasn't just about making a difference in other people's lives. It was also about discovering what truly mattered to him, what gave his own life meaning. He wasn't just playing a role in a movie. He was playing a role in the world, and that role, he realized, was to be a source of hope, a reminder that no one had to face their battles alone. Keanu's journey had now become more than just a series of charitable acts. It was a personal transformation, one that was shaping the way he saw the world. With every person he helped, he saw not just their pain or their struggle, but their potential for healing, for hope. He was learning that the greatest power didn't lie in grand gestures or speeches. It was in the small, consistent acts of kindness, the ones that didn't get applause or attention. He had started to see the world differently. Every person he passed on the street, every face he saw in a crowd, each one had a story. Each one carried their own burdens. He didn't know them, but for the first time, he felt a deep connection to humanity, to the shared experience of life's challenges and triumphs. It was humbling. One morning, Keanu was at a local park walking through the quiet paths, taking in the fresh air. It had become a routine for him, a time to center himself. As he walked, he noticed an elderly man sitting on a bench, his shoulders slumped as if the weight of the world rested on them. Keanu didn't think much of it at first, but something about the man caught his attention, something in his eyes. It was the same look he had seen in the firefighter, the same look he had seen in so many others, a mixture of fatigue, sadness, and resignation. Keanu found himself stopping in front of the bench, unsure of what to say or do. The elderly man looked up, meeting Keanu's gaze. He didn't say anything at first, but the sadness in his eyes spoke volumes. Keanu smiled warmly, sitting down on the bench next to him without hesitation. "You look like you've been carrying something heavy," Keanu said softly. The man didn't respond immediately. Instead, he took a deep breath, exhaling slowly as if he had been holding something in for far too long. "I've been alone for a long time," the man finally said, his voice rough with age and emotion. "My wife passed away a few years ago, and since then I've just been drifting. I don't know where to go, what to do with myself. Every day feels the same. I feel like I've lost my purpose." Keanu's heart went out to him. He had heard similar stories from so many others, people who had lost loved ones, who felt abandoned by life, who didn't know how to move forward. "It's hard, isn't it?" Keanu said, his voice gentle. "Losing someone you love. It's like the world stops and you're left behind trying to figure out how to keep going." The elderly man nodded, tears welling up in his eyes. "I don't know how to fill the emptiness. I feel like I'm just waiting for the days to pass." Keanu sat quietly for a moment, thinking carefully. He could feel the weight of the man's pain, but he also sensed that the man had more strength within him than he realized. "You know," Keanu said, breaking the silence, "sometimes the hardest part isn't facing the pain. It's finding the strength to keep moving, even when everything feels like it's falling apart." The elderly man looked at him, his eyes searching Keanu's face as if he were looking for something that could help him make sense of it all. "But how do I find that strength?" he asked. Keanu smiled, a reassuring warmth in his eyes. "You start small. You don't need to have all the answers right now. Just take one step at a time, and remember, you don't have to do it alone. People care about you, even if you don't always see it. We're all connected, you know." The man looked at him, his face softening. For the first time, Keanu saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a spark of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough. "Maybe," the man said, his voice trailing off. "Maybe I'm not as alone as I thought." Keanu nodded. "You're never truly alone. You just have to be willing to reach out when you need help." They sat together in silence for a while, the only sound the rustling of the leaves in the wind. Keanu didn't push him to talk anymore, didn't force him to open up further. Sometimes, just being there, showing someone they were seen, that was enough. As Keanu stood to leave, the elderly man looked up at him again, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I think I needed to hear that." Keanu smiled back, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time. "Take care of yourself," he said, giving the man's shoulder a reassuring pat. As he walked away, Keanu reflected on the encounter. It was moments like these, simple, quiet moments, that were the most powerful. They didn't require fame or fortune, just the willingness to connect, to listen, to offer a bit of light in someone's darkness. He didn't know if the elderly man's life would change overnight, but Keanu knew he had made a difference, even if it was in a small, almost imperceptible way. And for Keanu, that was enough. It was always enough. Keanu's journey had evolved in ways he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just about offering hope and support to those around him. It was about discovering that even in his own life, he needed to find deeper meaning. Every story, every person he met seemed to carry a lesson that slowly transformed the way he viewed his own path. But it wasn't easy. The road was often filled with doubts, moments of uncertainty, and the inevitable challenge of wondering whether his actions, his presence, could truly make a lasting difference. He found himself reflecting more than ever. Was what he was doing enough? Was he doing enough for those who were reaching out for help? Did he truly understand the depth of their struggles? Or was he just a face who appeared in their moment of need, offering words that sounded good but ultimately meant little? These questions haunted him, and on one quiet afternoon, Keanu sat alone in his home, his mind racing with thoughts of all the people he had met over the past few months. The veterans, the firefighter, the young woman at the hospital, and the elderly man in the park. Each encounter had left its mark on him. Each one had made him realize how fragile life could be, how fragile people were, and how important it was to hold space for others in their darkest moments. But even as he wrestled with his own thoughts, there was one person he hadn't been able to forget. A mother he had met during one of his charity visits, a mother who had lost her son in a tragic accident. Her grief had been overwhelming, her eyes empty of hope, as if she had given up on ever finding peace. When Keanu had spoken with her, he had seen the depths of her pain, the despair that seemed to consume her every waking moment. And yet, even though he had shared words of encouragement with her, he couldn't help but wonder if they had really reached her. He wondered if anything could truly reach someone who had lost a child, someone whose heart had been torn apart, in a way that no words could heal. He couldn't stop thinking about her. What could he do to help her find peace? He knew that grief wasn't something that could be easily fixed, that no amount of words could take away the pain of losing a loved one. But Keanu also knew that the most powerful thing he could offer wasn't a solution. It was the space to feel, to process, to grieve in a way that was real and unfiltered. He needed to find a way to let her know that it was okay to feel what she was feeling, that it was okay to be broken and still seek healing. After several weeks of thinking about her, Keanu reached out to the mother again, asking if she would be open to meeting. She agreed, though Keanu could sense her hesitation. When they met, there was a heaviness in the air, an unspoken understanding between them that the conversation would be difficult, even painful. She looked at him with guarded eyes, unsure of what to expect. "I'm glad you reached out," she said softly, her voice strained. "But I don't know if I'm ready for this. I don't know if I can move on. I don't think I ever will." Keanu understood. He wasn't there to tell her to move on or to let go of her grief. He wasn't there to give her false hope. He was there to offer something real, something that could help her process the pain, not erase it. "You don't have to move on," Keanu said quietly. "You don't have to let go. Grief doesn't work like that. It's not something you can just push away or get over. It's something you carry with you. But it doesn't mean it has to define you. It doesn't mean it has to control you." The mother's eyes welled up with tears, but she didn't look away. Instead, she reached for Keanu's hand, clutching it tightly. "I just feel so lost," she whispered. "I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know how to live in a world where my son isn't there." Keanu squeezed her hand gently, offering what little comfort he could. "You're not lost," he said softly. "You're grieving." And that's okay. What you're feeling is real, and it's going to take time. But that doesn't mean you have to do it alone. People care about you. People are here for you. And it's okay to lean on them. It's okay to feel broken. It's okay to not have all the answers. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The weight of her grief was palpable, but Keanu could see something shifting in her. Just a tiny glimmer of hope, the beginning of the long journey toward healing. I don't know how to let go of the pain, she said quietly. Keanu nodded. You don't have to. Just take it one day at a time. And when you're ready, you'll find a way to live with it. And you'll find a way to keep your son's memory alive. He's always going to be a part of you. But that doesn't mean you can't find peace too. The conversation wasn't easy. There were more tears, more pain, more silence. But Keanu knew that he wasn't there to fix everything. He was there to simply be a presence, to offer a small piece of comfort, and to remind her that it was okay to feel whatever she was feeling. She didn't need to have all the answers. She just needed to know that she wasn't alone. As they said goodbye, the mother gave him a small, grateful smile. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Keanu left that day feeling that, even though he couldn't take away her pain, he had offered her something important: the space to grieve, the permission to be vulnerable, and the reminder that she was not alone. And for Keanu, that was enough. As Keanu continued his journey of giving and connecting with those who needed him most, he realized that these moments, small, seemingly insignificant, were the ones that held the deepest meaning. He wasn't saving anyone. He wasn't playing the hero in a grand narrative. What he was doing was more powerful than any movie role he could ever take on. He was simply showing up. He was being present for others, listening without judgment, offering words of encouragement, and giving people a sense of belonging in a world that often made them feel invisible. It wasn't always easy, and it wasn't always glamorous, but every encounter, every person he met left him with a deeper sense of fulfillment. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about making a difference in the lives of real people, helping them find their strength, their hope, and sometimes simply a sense of peace. He had learned that sometimes the greatest gift you could give someone was the reminder that they were not alone, that their struggles mattered, and that they had the strength to keep going, even when everything felt impossible. Keanu's phone rang one day, interrupting his thoughts. It was a call he didn't expect, a call from the hospital where he had met the young woman who had been in a coma. Her family wanted to update him. He was anxious but hopeful as he answered the call. The young woman had made remarkable progress, far beyond what anyone had expected. She was awake, alert, and slowly regaining her strength. It was a miracle. Keanu's heart swelled with gratitude as he heard the news. He knew he had played only a small part in her recovery, but that was enough. He had shown up when she needed someone, and sometimes that was all it took to spark a change. Keanu decided to visit her again, this time with the knowledge that her journey of recovery was just beginning. When he walked into her room, she was sitting up in bed smiling at him. The sight of her smile filled him with an overwhelming sense of joy. "You look different," he said with a grin, taking a seat beside her. "You look like you're ready to take on the world." The young woman laughed, her voice still a bit weak but filled with determination. "I've got a long way to go, but I'm not giving up." Keanu nodded. "I'm proud of you, but remember, you don't have to do it alone. You've got a whole team behind you, and you've got people who care." She smiled again, a soft, sincere smile that spoke volumes. "Thank you for everything," she said quietly. "You really did help me when I didn't know how to help myself." Keanu sat with her for a while, talking about her progress, her hopes for the future, and the challenges she still faced. It wasn't a grand conversation, but it was meaningful. It was real. When he finally stood to leave, the young woman reached out and touched his arm. "I won't forget what you did for me," she said. "You gave me hope when I had none." Keanu's heart swelled with emotion. "I didn't give you hope," he said softly. "You had it inside of you all along. I just helped you see it." As he left the room, Keanu felt a deep sense of peace settle within him. His journey had taught him so much about the power of human connection, about the strength that could be found in vulnerability, and about the importance of showing up for others. He wasn't a savior. He was simply a person who cared, and in that simplicity he found his true purpose. He had learned that the greatest gift you could give someone was the gift of showing up, the gift of letting them know that they mattered, that they were seen, and that they were not alone. The world didn't need more heroes. It needed more people who were willing to listen, to care, and to make the world a little brighter, one small act of kindness at a time. And as Keanu stood at the threshold of the hospital, ready to walk out into the world once more, he knew that his work was far from over. There were still so many people who needed him, so many more stories to hear, so many more lives to touch. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He was going to keep showing up, and that in itself was enough. Please subscribe to the channel for Keanu Reeves' respect. Thanks.